All right, happy Groundhog Day. Welcome to episode number 53 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast. We're recording on February 2nd, 2020. This episode is sponsored by the Canadian Preppers Pet Network. Check them out at canadianpreppersnetwork.com. My name is Eric. I'm the host of the show. I'm based in Southern Ontario. I'm a hunter, target shooter, ham radio operator, VE3 EPN, and computer geek. I got into preparedness when I was working frontline emergency services and witnessed an over-reliance on emergency services during major events such as ice storms, power outages, etc. I started a small preparedness company to help people get prepared and better look after themselves for at least 72 hours, if not longer.
My name is Ian, and I live on Vancouver Island. I'm an outdoor enthusiast, sport shooter, reloader, and my farm's designated handyman.
I'm Joe Alton, MD. I'm the fellow of both the American College of Surgeons and the American College of OBGYN, founder of the survival medicine website, doomandbloom.net. We have over 1,200 articles, podcasts, and videos on medical preparedness. I'm also the author of books like let's see what we got here. The Survival Medicine Handbook, the book Alton's Antibiotics and Infectious Disease, about 5 other books. Besides those, you might know me also as the first physician to write about fish antibiotics in times of trouble in survival settings. And I talk about that in our book, Alton's Antibiotics and Infectious Disease, as well as some of our other books. And of course, you can always see all of our articles, videos, and podcasts absolutely free at doomandbloom.net.
I'm Alan. My friends and family call me a safety nerd. My background as a medical first responder has focused my mind towards safety above all else. I teach first aid, coach my family and friends to be better prepared. I'm a locksmith by trade. I've worked in the physical security industry for more than 20 years now, and I am an unabashed fan of Dr. Alton here, and the Survival Medicine Handbook is something I've read cover to cover more times than I can count.
Thank you. I'm honored.
And hello from Canada's East Coast. My name is Hughes from Nova Scotia, and I'm a Canadian Armed Forces veteran, volunteer firefighter and station chief, and a volunteer search and rescue technician and prepper. I've been preaching and living the prepper lifestyle to varying degrees for the last 6 years or so, and this was born out of necessity to ensure the short-term survival of my family, which includes 3 young children.
Hey, if you want to help support the show and keep the Canadian Prepper Podcast on the air, you can buy a Canadian Prepper Podcast t-shirt at prepperpodcast.ca. All the proceeds help keep the lights on and the backup generator fueled.
Well, if you're enjoying the show, please take a few minutes and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Canadian Prepper Podcast and submit a review on iTunes. Also, we want your feedback, good or bad. Even if there's a topic you want us to cover, please let us know.
All right, so we've got some medically sound content for you in this episode. We're going to start off with some news. We're going to let you know how we've improved our preparedness since our last episode. And we're going to get into the main topic of the episode, a discussion on the coronavirus. Let's move into some news.
Couple of articles I found. One, I didn't link an article to it, just more of an honorable mention. This past Tuesday was Let's Talk Day to raise awareness for mental health issues. There's no reason not to talk about every type of health, including your own mental health. There are a lot of great organizations out there that will help. For first responders out there, I've Got Your Back 911 and Boots on the Ground are 2 organizations in Canada that are always around to talk. If you are a first responder, reach out to your EAP, your Employee Assistance Plan, talk to your doctor, a friend, or if necessary, please call 911, but don't hesitate to ask if you do need help. Another quick article from the Center for Disease Control, and it's the spread risk of being in contact by droplet spread and physical contact, such as shaking hands, touching contaminated surfaces, then touching your mouth, eyes, or nose. So that was another article that I linked to in there. And it says there can also be transferred by fecal matter, although it is rare.
So I guess we're over to elbow bumps instead of fist bumps now.
Yep.
Or waving from a distance.
Yes. That could be it too. Hughes, you got a news article?
Oh.
No, I think
we lost Hughes.
We lost Hughes. All right. He was talking about a possible power outage that's going to happen, so I'm sure he'll be back. So I've got an article here in regards to Stormageddon in Newfoundland. Newfoundland and Labrador's emergency planning shows that there's actually a serious hole. So Newfoundland and Labrador spends less on preparing for emergencies than any other province in the Atlantic Canada. And the provincial emergency services budget quietly dropping at nearly a third over the last decade. So just some interesting information that's coming out of that big snowstorm there.
For a province that is isolated, prone to bad weather, and lacking in a lot of resources, that seems kind of counterintuitive.
It does. Yeah.
Well, do we have a sponsor?
We do have a sponsor.
Oh,
yeah. So what we've done lately for preps is brought to you by Super SE Straps. They're a pretty cool company. They're based in the U.S., veteran owned. Everything is handmade to order. You can check them out at supersestraps.com. They've got all kinds of really cool stuff. I've got an order coming. It did not arrive in time to review it here tonight, but hopefully for the next episode we will have stuff here. But they've got all kinds of really cool paracord gear and like really practical handkerchiefs. I ordered the one that I ordered is actually a lined, and it can be used as a Faraday box, which is pretty cool. They've got some pretty cool morale patch kits. So they're about the same size as standard morale patch, but they're a little pocket and a pouch, and they put stuff in it. They've got some really cool stuff there. So we're looking forward to receiving that order, and we'll review some gear from them in upcoming episodes.
Yeah. So for myself, what I've done lately since the last show is I went through and fixed up our water filtration system. So once a year, I swap out all the filters, I swap out the UV light, and I just make sure everything's operating correctly and as it should be. As I mentioned in all the other episodes, we are on a well and septic setup here. So making sure the water system is maintained and working properly is obviously quite important. So I always make sure to at least do that yearly. Check the filters every 6 months, but do a full clean out and swap around of everything every year. So that was done. I had to cut out some section of pipe and reconnect some because I found a leak along the way. So it was well worth it, because if not, it could have gotten a lot worse. So.
Cool. As for myself, I had a little confab with the mutual assistance group that I have arranged, and so we agreed that we won't break out the flamethrowers and the zombies just yet. So we had decided to call the DEFCON 4, just a heightened alertness more than anything else. So we did a hard self-evaluation of what we're missing for critical shortages, and we went off and fixed that. So we went to Costco and a couple other places. Then we went on a gas run to top off our supplies. Let's see here. Got some animal feed, dog food, and some shelf-stable items. We had about 2 feet of rain in the last week. So even though I've been gone for a couple weeks, came back day one, we had to dig out some ditches that were like filled with leaves and branches that got basically hit by a flash flood. And so that took up a good part of the day. And then, basically just picked up some more free brass at the range and just dealing with that. And that's pretty much it. But I've only been home for about maybe 36 hours now.
Sleep is for the weak.
Yep.
That's right.
I unfortunately had a fairly busy week with family emergencies, so I didn't get much else done. But there's lots on the horizon, and we'll talk more about it next week, I'm sure.
Awesome. So with that, we will move into the main topic of the show, and we will let Dr. Alton take it from here.
Well, I think everybody knows that there's an epidemic going on in China, mostly in mainland China, but also beginning to sporadically have travelers returning from there, coming down with a particular virus. The funny thing is that, of course, we're in the middle of flu season, and this is probably one of the few times that I'm here in January or February asked to go onto a podcast to talk about viruses and not talk about the flu. But indeed what we have is not the flu, another respiratory viral infection called the coronavirus. The coronavirus has been nicknamed a number of things. The Wuhan virus, after the city of 11 million. 11 million, by the way, is the 7th largest city in China. So that's a pretty big place. And so it's been called the Wuhan virus. It is actually officially known as 2019 small n c capital C small o capital V for novel coronavirus, nCoV. So that is what is going on right now. Now, the amazing thing about this virus is its transmissibility, and I cannot even keep up. I mean, you could see here in some of my notes of numbers that I've had to just today redo them several different times, and we are now at 17,387 cases of 2019 nCoV. 16,800 of them are in China. There have been 362 deaths. And the funny thing about it is of those 17,387 people, only 472 are considered to have recovered, which means that they believe that there are some longer term effects, and they're watching these people and they're not willing to say that the rest of these 17,000 people are recovered. So it's pretty amazing. The death toll has gone up by dribs and drabs. Thank goodness for that. It's about a 2% death toll. Now, one thing that you do need to know, though, is that the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918 and 1919, well, that had a 2% death rate as well. And so it happened, that particular virus happened to infect a third of the world's population, which was about 2 billion at that time. So there were about 50 to 100 million deaths. And hopefully we know a lot more about medicine and containment, infection control, and hopefully we'll get this a little bit more under control. There are 27 other countries that have people who almost all of them who have traveled from China. There are a couple, I know one in Chicago at the very least, that is sort of a homegrown infection. A lady who visited Wuhan, 60-year-old lady, came in and she she went home to her husband, and sure enough, he got it as well. Both of them seem to be okay. There have been very few deaths, only one death as far as I know outside of China. That is in the Philippines. That happened today. So one of the many new things that happened today with regards to this virus. Now, U.S. officials confirm a 9th case of the coronavirus in the United States. I think there are only 2 or 3 cases in Canada, and they are widely spread apart, one in Ontario, one in Vancouver. And the amazing thing is that we are partially ready for this. We can never be completely ready. I spoke to a virologist recently, and he feels that the United States has 200% less hospital beds for contagious disease than it needs, and 400% less intensive care unit beds than it would need for a significant outbreak of infectious disease. So as prepared as we are compared to many other countries, including China, we indeed still have a long way to go. We have learned some lessons since the Ebola epidemic in 2014. In 2014, a man from Liberia had the disease, showed up in Texas, and wound up infecting 2 nurses. And that, interestingly enough, I wanted to talk just a minute about transmissibility and the RO number. Okay, the RO number, or the R0 number, is actually how it's pronounced. Is what we refer to as a basic reproduction number. And what that is if you took somebody with a disease, an infectious disease, and you put them in a community that was completely free of disease and not ever exposed to it, how many people would that person with the infectious disease infect as well? And Ebola was only about 2 people, about 2 for every 1 person. There were about 2 people. And so for that reason, you had over the course of time, an epidemic that spread. If that number is 1 or less, the likelihood of an epidemic is much less, because you're not really replacing the people as they get better or die of the infection. This disease is about a 4, and 3 to 4, I would say. And so as a result, it is more transmissible than a lot of other infectious diseases. Now, interestingly enough, there are diseases that are a lot worse than that in terms of transmissibility, which is pretty amazing, since every 24 hours we're getting 2,500 more cases of coronavirus, at least mostly in mainland China. But measles, for every infected person with measles that goes into a community that is generally free of measles, that person infects 18 people.
Wow.
Your chances of getting infected by somebody with measles who's in the same room with you for more than an hour is 90%. If you have not had measles. So there are diseases that are certainly much more transmissible, and there are diseases that are certainly much higher in fatality rate. The Ebola epidemic in 2014, it had about a 45% death rate, and so that's pretty terrible with regards to that. But it was less infective. I want to talk a little bit about how we identify a pandemic from an epidemic, from just a disease that happens to be around. There's diseases that are endemic. An endemic disease is a disease that is always around in a particular area. So an endemic disease would be malaria. Malaria is a common endemic disease. Basically, it is around all year round, and it is in, for example, the tropics. Malaria would be an example. For an epidemic, we'll have to talk a little bit about that. Before we get to an epidemic, we have the phases that go from infectious disease all the way to epidemic, all the way to a pandemic. And that is something that occurs through the World Health Organization through a series of phase alerts that tell you what is going to happen. So a phase 1 alert is basically a virus that circulates, for example, in animals. Let's say hoof and mouth disease. A hoof and mouth disease may kill all your cows, but it's not going to kill a member of your family. A phase 2 disease is something that has now gone from an animal to a human, but very rare. And that would be like avian flu. The bird flu, the people that wound up getting the bird flu in general were people that were poultry workers in Asia. And so that's 2. Phase 3, you start having clusters here and there of people in different areas of people that have the disease, but not community-wide infections. Now, what we have with the current coronavirus is a phase 4. And that means that you have community-wide outbreaks, multiple areas in a particular region, and usually within a particular country. In this case, that country is China, with sporadic events that occur elsewhere, but mostly because of travel, somebody returning from travel to China. And then you have 5, that was, let's say, Ebola would be an excellent example of that, where there was a community-wide spread in different countries, but in the same region. And if you remember Ebola, West Africa, Ivory Coast, Sierra Leone, these places were different countries, but in the same region. That's a level 5. And then when you finally hit phase 6, you've got an actual pandemic, community level outbreaks in different countries, different regions, and that's the deal. So if in China you have a lot of these community-wide outbreaks, and then you have a community-wide outbreak in Paris, you have a community outbreak in New York City or in Chicago, well, you've got a real pandemic. So that is a big problem. Now, I wanted to just talk for a second why the coronavirus is so prone to mutate. Viruses mutate. I think everybody knows that. That is not an uncommon thing for a virus to do. Well, what I could say is that you've got a very special kind of virus right now. It is the virus that we have is called coronavirus 2019 nCoV, and that is just a member of the coronavirus or coronaviridae family. That includes things like SARS, which I think a lot of people have heard of. MERS is Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. These are related to the current epidemic that we're dealing with right now. And these have just popped up since the early 2000s. And so there are a total of 7 strains, of which most of them we've never heard of until the early 2000s. SARS, for example, sudden acute respiratory syndrome, that was 2003, and MERS, I think, was a little bit later than that. And why is that happening? The reason why that's happening is because these are RNA viruses. RNA is different than DNA. Basically, we have DNA and we have RNA, but these viruses, these coronaviruses, only have RNA, and that's ribonucleic acid, and they have, these RNA viruses, a much higher mutation rate compared to DNA viruses, and that leaves the possibility of genetic errors occurring more frequently. When I say errors or genetic mistakes, I mean, as a virus reproduces, it can produce imperfect copies of itself in the form of mutations, and it does it much more often than a regular virus would do that. So the interesting thing is, in most cases, when it mutates, not much happens. It was not a mutation that changed it a lot. Sometimes it even hinders the virus, the mutation, but sometimes it can turn the virus into a super virus that makes it more transmissible, that makes it multiply faster, that makes it harder to kill. So that means that each person who becomes a host has the potential to become patient zero for a new improved virus. That is a big, big issue. So SARS, let's see, I think that was about 8,000 cases over 6 months, 800 deaths there. And Middle East respiratory syndrome, that one only had maybe 3,000 or 4,000 cases, but it had about a 40% death rate. So it was pretty bad. And of course, what we have is the 2% that we have here with the coronavirus right now. So how does coronavirus spread? Is this, have I actually given you a moment to actually inhale, you guys? I don't know if I have.
I do.
Well, I just want you guys to know that the coronavirus spreads through close contact with other people. Basically, usually as a result of coughing or sneezing on everyone or anyone who is within a range of, let's say, about 3 to 6 feet from that person. That's what we consider to be close contact. And if one thing that's important to know is that there's so many different ways that droplets filled with virus can actually get on you. They can get on your shirt. If somebody sneezes on you, it can go, a drop can go in your eye. The eye is actually sort of interesting, and people wonder, well, why did I get sick? I was wearing a mask the entire time. Well, there may be aerosolized droplets with virus in it that actually touch your eye. Once it touches your eye, the cleansing and the draining, the natural way that you sort of cleanse your eye is through your tear duct. And so a virus goes from the surface of your eye down into your tear duct. And where do you think that goes? It goes right into your nasal airways. And it goes from your nasal airways into your oropharynx. And basically you are now a host. And that's pretty crazy. I mean, because it's unclear. The worst thing about this is unclear how long the particles of this new coronavirus actually can live on areas like work counters, surface areas, on your shoes, on your clothes. And the amazing thing is that for a disease that has a 2 to 14 day incubation period, that's the time between when the virus goes into your body and you start to exhibit symptoms, you are actually probably going to be contagious for those 2 to 14 days before you even knew that you were sick. And that's what makes it so dangerous and so highly transmissible, is that most of the people that came from Wuhan generally healthy and doing fine, and got sick several days afterwards, after they actually got home to their home country. So this is something to be concerned about, something to pay attention to, and we'll talk. I'll let you guys talk, but we have some ways that I think that might be simple preventative measures that will help a lot.
So with other coronaviruses, what was the what's the proper term for that? Kind of the half-life of how long that virus could live outside a host?
They could live outside a house probably. It depends on how moist the surface was, but let's say if it was a kitchen counter, just a few hours.
Okay.
But we think that's different with this one.
Right. And what are the, obviously you just said moisture is one of the contributing factors. Is the type of surface that it's on also a contributing factor? So a harder surface versus a fabric surface?
Well, if the surface if the surface is your eye, obviously it's going to live longer and be more successful than if it's a work counter. If fabric surfaces are notorious for being repositories for infectious particles. And so that's why if you read my article or chapters in my book on how to put together an effective survival sick room for epidemics, that I always tell you to be minimalist in your furnishings and absolutely no carpet, absolutely no fabric covered furniture. And if you do that, then your chances of being able to disinfect the area on a regular basis is much better.
Okay. And that would also theoretically apply to decontaminating someone before they're coming into your living space too, right? So obviously you want to quarantine if you can, but decon, you're looking for the porous surfaces and trying to keep those outside of your safe zone. Is that right?
Yes, you want to quarantine people as much as you can, but you have to remember the quarantine is not 100% effective. As a matter of fact, when they announced the quarantine in Wuhan, China, where the outbreak began, more than 5 million people that happened to be in there. It was, remember, close to Lunar New Year, Chinese New Year. There were like 40 million people in the city, and 5 million of them, they were supposed to be staying there because they were quarantined, but 5 million of them actually got out. And each one of them could have been a reason why another community wound up having an outbreak there.
And Dr. Joe, sorry I dropped off for a minute, but do we know what the R0 value of this virus is?
Yes, 3 to 4. It's 3 to 4, very similar to SARS, to MERS, and it is more than Ebola, less than Zika, much less than measles, but remember that the rate of contagion does not mean the rate of fatality. The mortality rate or the fatality rate is much different. So Ebola, not quite as infective, although it was indeed effective enough to have an outbreak that would grew for a while, but highly fatal. And but there are simple things, even just hydrating the person. Once they were able to get, interestingly enough, some IV fluids down to the people in West Africa in quantities that made a difference, the death rate, which was 60%, went down to 42, 44, 45%.
So then hydration. In thinking about how bad this pandemic could be, looking at the R0, which is, the typical seasonal flu is what, like 1.2, 1.4, I think.
Yeah.
So the R0 for this is much higher, but the fatality rate so far at 2% is roughly in line with the seasonal flu, isn't it?
No. The seasonal flu is probably 0.0 something.
Okay. I thought it was a lot higher than that.
It's low. No, it's lower. It's significantly lower. And I mentioned something earlier about the way viruses change. And if a virus doesn't change much over the course of a year, then your vaccines are going to be more effective, and the population has been exposed to something so similar that in general there's more immunity. If a virus changes a lot, mutates a lot, and becomes a different strain, where the previous year's virus is much less effective. I've mentioned some years where the virus was about 19% effective in preventing the flu, 29% effective in another year. Well, what happens then is you're just not ready for that virus. You just have not been exposed to anything like it before. And that's when you have things like the Spanish flu epidemic, and you have the swine flu epidemic, Hong Kong flu in the 50s. There's a whole series of different antigenic shifts, not drifts, but shifts that human beings were not ready for, and when you're not exposed, when you're not immune or naturally immune or have had exposure to a virus, there's a problem. And in some areas of Canada, 80 to 90% of the native population was wiped out by Europeans, not because they necessarily had ill intentions, but they simply had smallpox.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Actually, I got a quick question for Dr. Alton. If with the big run on N95 masks worldwide, what's your opinion on how effective they are? But also, is it more about containing the spread if somebody's already sick, or is it actually going to be any good whatsoever, like actually preventing from ingesting the droplets, so to speak, as well as coupled with goggles, I guess?
A lot of people may think that it's not, that it's sort of a no-brainer that the N95 mask would be protective. But one thing I want you to know is that the N9. Oh, by the way, let me just say first what an N95 mask is. An N95 mask is N stands for non-oil resistant. It is used for biological protection, whereas there is R, which is oil resistant, and P masks, and those are mostly used in agricultural and industrial situations, painting houses and things like that. The 95 part of it says that that mask will stop particulates that are more than 0.3 microns in size, 95%. Now, this is a human hair that I have just cut in cross section. You see that, right?
Yep.
Okay. Hold on one second. Okay. Or I actually did this in a previous show. I want you to look closer. Do you see a dot there?
Yep.
Yes, we do.
Yep.
That's a micron. So that mask actually can protect you from things that are 0.3 the size of that dot. Now, the thing is that the coronavirus family, all the viruses are smaller than 0.3 microns.
Good.
So you would think that it wouldn't be effective. And for a long period of time, I thought that too, until I dug up some studies that were done on a coronavirus called Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. There were studies done in Saudi Arabia, and they did studies on medical workers who worked with people that had MERS, M-E-R-S, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. And they found that there was a significant protective effect for wearing an N95 mask, even though it doesn't guarantee the blockage of those particulates. And so that's how I actually have, although logically you would think that these particles should be able to get through, there is actually there's hard scientific evidence that is protective to some effect.
It also depends on how well the seal is around the sides of the mask as well, and how well it fits.
I'm so glad you asked. Let's see. I have a number of different masks. Oh, now I have this thing on. Well, hold on one second. Oh, let me have one of them. Let me have one of those. I'm having my employer. I'm having my employer help me.
Employer. Hi, everybody.
NurseAmy.
Let's see. Uh-oh. You know what? I have others over here.
I have one over here somewhere.
Yes.
I did hear that one of the reasons why they find N95s to be effective is because it prevents you from touching your face.
Yes.
So that's what I heard, that it won't necessarily stop the virus from being ingested through the mask, but it stops you from touching your mouth and your face, and that in itself should reduce.
And that's why some kind of eye protection, either in the form of a goggle, an indirectly vented goggle, or a face shield,
Oh,
is
I have tons
and
of
helpful in preventing those splash droplets from getting in to the areas, because you are constantly being exposed to droplets from other people. I mean, there's somebody that may have sneezed 4 feet away from you on the bus or the subway, the metro, and got on the back of your shirt, and you just go like this and then touch your face, and sure enough, you get sick. So it's hard, and there's a lot of serendipity involved in terms of getting sick. Now, I do want to show the mask, how to put them. This is a different mask, and the one thing I have to say is the enemy of a good proper fit to a mask is a goatee.
Wait, ready?
Yeah.
Oh, we got one.
Wait. Isn't that what they do in the movies? They slowly put it over there.
All right. Now, here are a couple of N95 masks, as Ian had described. And this is one that's popular. It's sort of a duckbill type. This is an N95 that's made by 3M, very popular also. And this one is one of the ones I like most. Basically, I'm hoping you can see this. It has 2 bands. Do you see the bands?
Yep.
The
You can see them.
Yep. And basically, you have an area here where you have.
Wait, let me set it up for you first.
She's going. Okay. I'm the kind of guy that needs constant help from my caregiver. All right. Thank you. All right. So what you want to do when you place this on, as you can see, what you want to do is what? This is not. We do a weekly podcast. We do a weekly podcast ourselves, and she spends half of the time gesticulating wildly in the background.
I'm a demonstration person.
I'm going to demonstrate here. This is the top. Okay, basically you're supposed to hold it like this, place it on your face, and then you take this. You take the upper strip and you put it over the top of your head, over the crown of your head. Okay? Then you're supposed to find the lower band, which I actually have to look for. Here, you see it? Oh, there it is. Okay. And you do this, still basically you're trying to keep your hand on this mask. Here. So you put that here. This is not working too well because I'm wearing this, of course. All right. And then you stretch it, one over your chin, one over your nose. Now, this is the fit test. This is what I actually wanted you to know. And that is, with both hands, you apply pressure starting at the bridge of your nose, and you mold this to your face. And you mold it to your face as best you can. And you want to make sure that the bottom of your chin is covered. You want to make sure the bridge of your nose is covered. Now, then what you do, without applying pressure, you put your hands in front, you just lightly hold the mask, then you breathe in sharply. And if there's a good fit, usually there's a little bit of an indentation that occurs in the mask. Then you breathe out sharply, and you're feeling if there is any air coming out here or on the side of the mask. And if you haven't done that, then what happens is that you can have particulates that can come in through the mask itself. And so what you want to have the best protection, you want to have a mask that has a proper fit, and you want to have something that will protect your eyes. And so this would be an acceptable way to go. And of course, if I didn't have these ear headphones on, this would look a lot smoother. But basically, this is sorry about that. This is the way that I think that you would protect yourself. Now, your coveralls would have a hood. And by the way, removing this, basically what you do is you remove the back. The funny thing about this, okay, you move the bottom one first. The bottom one should have been over the nape of my neck. Oh, should have been in the neck, and that's what you remove first. And then, and you allow that to fall like this. And And then without touching the mask itself, if you can, I shouldn't have done this with the headphones on, I'm sorry. But let's say I had already done this. Then what you're doing is you are trying to grasp the mask in such a fashion that you're not touching the front. Have you ever seen those shows where the doctor, has just came out of surgery or came out of the ER and his mask is here, just hanging from ties? Well, guess what? Totally contaminated. So he just contaminated the whole front of his body by doing that. So that was absolutely the wrong thing to do. Again, I'm sorry that I have to figure out a way to. By the way, I don't know. I usually don't use headphones. Do you hear me when I don't have the headphones on?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, we just use the headphones.
We really enjoyed the visual demonstration, though. That was great.
It was great.
That was good, though. We just use the headphones to prevent the echo. That's all.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, anyhow, that was an absolutely inept presentation of how to actually put a mask on. However, I would like you to go on my YouTube channel, DrBones NurseAmy, DrBones NurseAmy, and go to face masks part 1 and part 2. You can see me actually do it in a manner that makes sense. Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's a great video. I've watched them. It's quite informational, so it's worth checking out.
Okay. Well. So where are we now? I forget. I'm answering questions.
Yeah. Pretty much. We've got actually a good one right now from Adrian Finley. And our first question that she had for us was, how accurate do you feel the numbers coming out of China are? Like, the chatter is indicating that the Chinese government is reporting less honest numbers of cases and or deaths.
I believe that there are at least 20,000 more cases than are being reported. I believe the deaths currently are relatively accurate. The deaths in the first couple of weeks were totally inaccurate because they were calling people viral pneumonia without any particular tests being done on them. They're just assuming these people were dying of the old man's friend, basically the pneumonia that occurs in older people towards the end of their life that ends their suffering. That's why they call it the old man's friend. So then, and over there, they actually don't make too big a deal about that. And the paperwork obviously is not something that is as important to them. So if there's something looks like just a pneumonia for them for quite a period of time, they were not really trying to figure out why this was happening. It was just when numbers started piling up that they became concerned. So the numbers that you have, probably more accurate now than they were, but I believe there are at least 20,000 more cases than have been reported, and certainly several hundred more deaths.
Do you think they're just trying to avoid the panic or some flashback from overseas because of that, or just a latency with the delay of testing kits and stuff?
Wendy, I think all of those things are factors. I believe that if you have a population of 1.whatever billion, I think it's probably a wise thing to try to not have to inculcate panic in people. However, I think people have a right to know, and the fact that they held this close to the vest for so long, I think cost some people their lives.
I'm wondering, though, how many people could be contagious, could have the virus, and they're just not reporting to the hospital, thinking that it might just be a flu or a pneumonia or something like that, right? The
Wuhan is a ghost town, you would think, for a city that has 11 million people that live in it. The streets are empty. And so I believe people are at home. I believe that they're not wanting to present to a doctor, and that actually the odds are in their favor that they will recover from it. There's theoretically, this particular coronavirus in 80% of the cases just gives you mild flu-like symptoms, or like a severe cold, and you get better in a week or 10 days. And the bad thing is that 1 in 5 people, 1 in 5 actually go on to have a much worse situation where the cells lining the lungs are damaged or infected and are damaged, causing breathing difficulties and pneumonia, respiratory failure, and after that, organ failure ensues. So what's happening is the high percentage of people that are getting pretty sick is straining the infrastructure, the medical infrastructure. Now, these guys, if they put up a hospital for 1,000 people in a week. Now, of course, my opinion is that was 4 walls and 1,000 cots that were put in the building for the most part. But they are trying to contain it by having hospitals, and they build them pretty quickly. In Atlanta, near where my father-in-law lives, there are huge buildings that are completely empty. That are advertised as office space. They are at least 100,000 square feet each, and there are at least a dozen of them. And I think that since they're near the CDC, that they're probably somewhere that they would probably make similar hospitals to what the Chinese did if there was such an outbreak in this country.
Yeah, I think I got the impression of underreporting as well when they, at the time they only had like 900 cases advertised, and they immediately went to work building this giant hospital. It seemed the reaction was not commensurate with the actual numbers.
Call it a bit of a
So
clue.
the thing was, the response was commensurate with the actual numbers.
Yeah, yeah.
But not the numbers that were reported.
And I guess if you don't show up to the hospital, you're not counted as a number either, right? So if you're just suffering at home.
Well, that's one thing that I've read as well from somebody who was working out of Hong Kong. They were saying that some of the people in Wuhan were showed video that was spreading on WeChat through the Chinese social media that was showing hospitals in Wuhan that were lined with bodies in the hallways. So to myself, if I'm sick and I've got flu-like symptoms, am I going to go to a hospital? There's a bunch of dead people lining the halls. I don't think so, right? But again, this is speculation. This is what we're seeing out of social media in China. These things get shut down pretty quickly as well. So, but that could be why people are hesitant to go to hospital as well.
Yeah.
We actually also had a question from Denob there asking about rumors of a potential vaccine in the works, I guess.
Yes, there is they want to have a vaccine, but it's going to take a while, I think, before they have a vaccine. There's all sorts of different levels of evaluation of possible vaccines, so that's going to take a while. Now, treatment for this coronavirus, just this morning, if you asked me that question, I would say just symptomatic treatment that you would do for whatever symptoms people have. You would give them acetaminophen, for example, or maybe ibuprofen. For fever, you would give them, if they have nasal congestion, you would give them a decongestant, a cough suppressant, although I'm not a big fan of that in general, if it's a severe cough. But in Thailand, interestingly enough, there are 2 doctors that say that claim that they made a 70-year-old woman improve greatly over the course of 48 hours by mixing oseltamivir, or Tamiflu in this country, and 2 unpronounceable HIV drugs that are given to people that have human immunodeficiency virus, in a cocktail in which they put more or a higher dose of the oseltamivir than normally people would take for influenza, and they gave these 2 HIV drugs and mixed them together into a cocktail, gave them to a 70-year-old woman who apparently was positive for the virus for 10 days, and in 48 hours after beginning this cocktail was negative for the virus. And so that gives us some hope that there may be somewhere a treatment that may be effective in helping. That this is It's not anecdotal because it actually is considered to be. They're considered to be people that are have a decent reputation in their own countries. But the interesting thing to me is why would an HIV drug and maybe a influenza drug be helpful for these people unless there is genomic contribution from these kinds of viruses in the genome of this coronavirus? What I'm trying to say is that, and this is purely a conspiracy theory that is, has no hard evidence, but the only biosafety level 4 lab in the entire country of China is in Wuhan. And I was wondering, could it be that this was some kind of weird accidental release of weaponized virus into the population? That's the question. Now, I mean, that is right now, I have absolutely no hard evidence of that. I discount it as a conspiracy theory, but why would it HIV, if you wanted to make a really bad virus, you would want to combine the influenza with HIV with coronavirus, and you would have a hell of a virus. And the fact that the medicines for that actually helped this lady, it's interesting. It's food for thought, but nothing that scientifically has a scientific basis.
Oh, it is interesting. We do have a question here in the live chat from Terry Blackmore. He says, first off, thanks for the information. And considering if we wore a mask and gloves, what methods would average folks use to decontaminate ourselves after returning from an area we feel may have been exposed or exposed us to this?
I have a list of some common errors of reasons why you would contaminate yourself. And the first one is that if you looked at people gowning up and during the Ebola epidemic to give care to victims of the Ebola epidemic, they never did that alone. They were always watched to make sure that what they were doing, placing gowns on, donning and doffing gowns, was always done with somebody else watching, because there are lots of ways that you can make a mistake and wind up contaminating yourself. And that's exactly what happened to those two nurses in Dallas with the Liberian Ebola patient when he showed up in Dallas. So things that are important is, number one, a poorly fitted mask. And I showed you a little bit of I showed you very poorly how you would do a proper fit test. Don't forget to look at the video. Not using enough hand sanitizer. Now, this is something that is a pet peeve of mine. You see this? People seem to think that this is the amount of hand sanitizer you should use. You should be using that amount. Oh,
it's not the time to be skimpy.
Right. Nope. Exactly. You need to be able to cover yourself completely. And if you're using soap and water, you need to use it for at least 20 seconds. Just everybody knows sing "Happy Birthday," the "Happy Birthday" song twice in a row, and that's the amount of time you need to be washing your hands. So that's very important. Not protecting your eyes, big issue. You mentioned mask and gloves. It's not just mask and gloves. It's masks and gloves and some form of eye protection. So that's something that I think is super, super important. I think people don't realize that they just don't protect their eyes well. And also not realizing, I touched on this a little bit, that other surfaces other than your face are going to be contaminated that end up, because you touch your face, contaminating you. And that could be anything from your clothes, your pants, your shirt, your shoes. When you take off your shoes, you could actually have virus on your shoes. Work surfaces, work counters, kitchen counters, things like that. Food, all of these things are possible nituses of infection. So that's something. So these are just some of the common mistakes that I see that would cause you to make an error. And I think the main one is just not having enough of the appropriate type of protection. So things that I want you to have, first off, you have to determine the level of concern that you have for this virus. Yeah, everything that I write about assumes that something has happened and some disaster has taken away modern medicine for the long run. And that's what I talk about. And so in many circumstances, well, you might not expect or may not think that there's going to be some long-term event. And if there's some kind of long-term event, well, the medicines that you have and the various kinds of pandemic items, well, you may expend all of them just simply because you believe that there is some kind of long-term event that's going to happen, that's going to expend it, and that's all you're going to have. So things that if you really believe that there could be something that can happen, that you need special equipment, you want to wear coveralls with both shoe covers and head covers as well. I have one other thing that is important. Most coveralls have booties. Most coveralls have booties, but that's not enough protection. The coverall booty is not protection. You need actually an actual boot like this. So you would need to have this covering the bottom part of your leg to have good protection. And I actually have a 5-gallon bucket that I would have a chlorine solution in that I would take when I take my boots off. They would go straight into that chlorine solution. So these are basically rubber boots or vinyl boots, but that's the kind of protection that you need for even for your feet. So that's some of the stuff I want you to have. I want you to have masks, goggles, want you to have gloves. Now remember, there's an epidemic of latex allergy in our country. I don't know if in Canada that's an issue, but if that is an issue, then you should go get nitrile gloves or a number of different gloves. I have on our pandemic kits that we have on our website, I have gloves that have a very long wrist. They're 12 inches, basically. And the reason why that's important is when you have a coverall on and you have gloves on, what happens is while you're doing work, there may be that defect where you actually can see the wrist because you stretched or did something like that. So whenever you put a coverall on, what you need to do is you need to raise your hand over your head and see if your wrist remains covered by the glove. If it doesn't, then you need to reassess the way you're putting on your equipment, or you need to have gloves that have a longer wrist. Aprons, very good to have. Hand sanitizers, I mentioned, alcohol and BZK. These are good wipes to have. Biohazard bags. When I take off my items, I actually stand in a biohazard bag. And so as I am taking things off, they're dropped either into a 5-gallon bucket or into the biohazard bag. Let me see where I'm trying to. So unfortunately, I can't show you this, but basically as I'm taking my coverall off, it's ending up in a big biohazard bag. And so that's, I think, one way that you can more effectively make sure you don't decontaminate. Chlorine bleach, I think, is a perfectly fine way to decontaminate or disinfect work surfaces. Soap and water, also good. Remember, soap and water, if you're physically dirty, hand sanitizer doesn't cut it. You have to have soap and water. And so that's important. If you can see dirt, soap and water, not hand sanitizer. And of course, things that you would need would be a thermometer, of course, to monitor fever and your general medical supplies. And one other thing, a whistle. or some other kind of noisemaker, because you as a caregiver, you're not going to be able to be in the sick room 24 hours a day. And so you need to have some way for your sick patients in your epidemic room, in your sick room or your hospital tent, to know that they need you. And that helps give them confidence that, that you're there to help them. And I think that kind of mental confidence, helps them recover.
That's a great point.
Yeah, that's really
We've
good.
got another question here in the live chat, just in regards to all the equipment and everything that you've been talking about from Fraser. He says, is there any kind of certification level for some of these items that you've been talking about, like a symbol or something that would let somebody know that it's a legitimate item? I'd hate to be purchasing something on, say, Amazon and have it not actually be functional.
Yes. Look here and you'll see the letters NIOSH. It's basically National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, right? I think is what that stands for. And so you'll see this N95 has it. And this N95 also has it. So that's what you're looking for. You want all of your items really to have that, although your rubber boots, I think, rubber boots are rubber boots, but your coveralls, all the other items that we have are NIOSH approved. Oh, she's going to show it.
Do you want it?
Okay.
Here you go, babe.
This is a typical coverall. Your coverall needs to have a hood. Now, the hood can be separate. Or it can be attached. This particular Tyvek is a good brand. Tyvek brand coverall is very useful. They're hard to find in medical supply stores now, but believe it or not, some Home Depots will actually have it, or Lowe's. I'm not sure. What is the name of your?
We have Home Depot and Lowe's and
okay.
Canadian Tire. Yep.
You'll find these there. But you get the one that has the hood, because that's really important. If you have the hood, imagine you have the hood on, you have the mask on, and you have a face shield or goggles on, then you've got pretty good protection.
If you don't have a whole pile of sets of coveralls, though, based on the fact that the virus can't survive forever, is it possible to reuse some of those suits if you let them hang for a few days somewhere away?
I would wash them with a mild bleach solution if you're going to do that. Yeah, see, these are some of the things that you have to think about in a true knock you off the grid, super flu kind of situation. Is you have to realize that everything that you have accumulated, regardless of who you are, even I will run out of medical supplies if the society ending event lasts long enough. And so for that reason, you have to go completely outside the conventional medical wisdom, which I do relatively often. I actually have an active medical license. I'd like to keep it. But we have to think about what we would do if we were down to our last few masks or our last few coveralls.
Well, I'd like to say that this was just a little experiment. I mean, if you think about it,
Yeah.
we had a little test here.
Right. Can they hear you?
Yeah, they can.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh. All right.
We had
Well,
we
sit
had
down here.
we had
with
a
me.
test of running out of supplies.
Yes.
I mean, just from a scare, let alone, like a real.
Yes, for a period of time, we actually put together all sorts of medical kits and things like that. And we actually ran out of these things.
Yeah, that's why this is an
for a period of
empty
time.
box.
until
So one more note on your decontamination as you're cleaning your boots and you're doffing your equipment. Make sure that you're doing that well away from your house, the rest of your life, because you want to keep that virus. It does have a bit of a half-life, so set up your decon area, to your property and keep it as far away from your living quarters as possible.
I would say that I also talk about that in my sick room articles that you'll find on the website. The important thing is that your sick room, if it's going to be in your home, there should be a area well away from common areas. So not where food is being prepared, not where you would expect traffic kids running around, things like that. You need to have that person somewhere else. If you are on the road, if you have had to bug out, as they say, and you are all in tents, then before anything happens, you have to designate which is the hospital tent. Because if everybody just brings a tent and you decide that this tent is going to be the hospital tent, you have just evicted somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're going to do is you're going to cause a great deal of resentment at a time when everybody has to pull together. So you need to have a dedicated hospital tent. Not even a bad idea to have dedicated bedding, dedicated eating utensils for the sick. If the event is that kind of event, is an infectious disease kind of event.
So
What's funny is, sorry, you go ahead, Alan.
I was going to say, not a bad idea to add a small tent to your medical box in your evac box, in your evac kit. Then
completely agree.
I was just going to say, I work for emergency services for a fairly large Canadian city, and we've been ordering things like N95 masks so that we have more at the station. Whenever we respond to a medical call, it's protocol to have an N95 mask and eye protection, all that kind of stuff, and we're actually unable to get them. So the supplies we have in the station now, or what we have, I'm sure the government of Canada and obviously the U.S. government as well probably has stockpiles of these things, but they're not available to us right now as frontline responders, because all their stuff is ordered commercially through distributors, right? So, we have other things we could do. We can wear like a full SCBA and breathe their own air and all that kind of stuff, but it's not really a sustainable solution. So it's just kind of interesting to me that, all the stores are sold out and frontline emergency workers are also not able to get this. I can't speak for the hospitals in the area and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure that they have more than adequate supplies, but it just kind of caught me off guard this week when I saw that.
You have to remember that basically the government or your national security stockpile, national stockpile of medical items and things like that, those aren't meant to go to the citizens. Those are meant to maintain the continuity of the government. Not because they're evil people or anything like that, but because the society without a government is not very polite society. And so they want a lot of the equipment and a lot of the medical stuff that these national stockpiles have really are not meant for you as individuals. And that's why I think it's so important for you to have your own stockpile of medical supplies. And they say the beans and the bullets. I think it's the beans and the bandages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great point.
Mm-hmm.
So
with that note, actually, if we could circle back to the original part of the podcast, you mentioned the under availability of ICU beds and emergency, hospital capacity. If somebody ends up getting symptomatic and we've gotten to the point where most of these places are overwhelmed because of caseload, if you're symptomatic at that point, would you recommend just sheltering in place or just going to the hospital and hoping for the best, or is this too many variables involved?
If you have prepared, if you planned in advance, if you read mine or I'm sure many other excellent authors have written articles on this, if you have the ability to put together a good sick room, remember, if you go out in the midst of an epidemic situation into a hospital, you're going into the most crowded place probably in the entire city or the entire town. And this is a pretty strange thing coming from a doctor, but nobody gets better in a hospital when it comes to an epidemic disease. And basically what happens is you're going to be exposed again and again. Your family who brings you there are going to be exposed. They could easily become sick themselves. So if you have confidence that your current medical infrastructure has taken a large-scale epidemic into account and has taken measures to protect you from inadvertent contamination, then great, you can go to the hospital, take your family member to the hospital. If not, I honestly believe that, and this is not paranoia, this is actually if you go to the CDC, this is actually a strategy. Social distancing is not considered to be a bad idea when there are community-wide outbreaks of very contagious diseases.
Good to know.
That's really interesting.
Another thing too, I was wondering is if I'm showing symptoms, flu-like symptoms, and I go to the hospital, and it turns out I've got the seasonal flu, and then all of a sudden I contract the coronavirus on top of that. That's one thing to consider as well, right? I mean, you're not sure what you got.
Right. Just because you have one virus doesn't mean you couldn't get another.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how, although it's true that the elderly and infirm, people like me, wind up getting the flu in worse than other people. Healthy, strong, strapping lads like yourselves, well, you are just as likely to get the flu. You may do better and come out of it better than I would, but you're just as likely to get the flu as anyone else if you don't have protection.
We've got another good question here in the live chat. Could an asymptomatic carrier never manifest to full-blown case yet still infect others?
Yes. Period.
There we go.
That was easy.
That was easy. Yep.
and that is what the problem is with this. One of the main issues with this coronavirus is that people that are not symptomatic are giving viral loads to their loved ones, for example, or to people that they're in close quarters with, like in the cabin of an airplane. So these are concerns, and that's why at one point or another, some of these travel bans are, do make sense.
Our daughter canceled her trip to Japan.
Right. Our daughter was actually going to Japan in
The end of this month.
And canceled the trip, and it's not unwise that she did that.
So aside from avoiding exposure, is there anything we could do as an immunobooster or anything like that to get a jump on exposure?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of things that you can do to protect yourself from getting sick. I mean, remember I mentioned washing your hands, and the question is, when do you have to wash your hands? I mean, if you look at this list here, that from the World Health Organization, there's probably no time where you're not washing your hands. I mean, you're washing your hands after you cough, or after you sneeze, when you're caring for the sick, before, during, and after you prepare food, before eating, after the use of the toilet, please, when hands are visibly dirty, and after handling animals or animal waste, and honestly, after touching your face. And everybody inadvertently touches their face throughout the day. I take a look next time you guys actually get together. Just take a look at yourselves. You take for a half hour, take a look at the other guys in your group, and just see how many times they touch their hands with their face with their hands.
I want to mention one more time that nobody thinks about is when you go to the grocery store.
Oh, yeah.
They've got these Sani wipes, hand sanitizer wipes outside of the grocery store so you can wipe down your cart handle and your hands. I carry mine around with me because we literally touch hundreds of items inside the grocery store, sometimes looking at different expiration dates. Right. It's the same item, but we might pick up 5 or 6 or 7 of them.
That somebody else may have picked up to
crackers,
look at the ingredients.
Exactly the same thing. So by the time you go through a grocery store, if you're doing a good shopping, you could touch hundreds of items. Then you get to the counter. Now you're touching the checkout pad where you put your credit card, your PIN number. Goodness knows how many people have touched that finger pad before you did, and nobody ever wipes that thing down. So that's why I keep my Sani wipe. Of course, by the time I get there, it's a little dry. But I did talk to the grocery store, and I said, please put a container of your hand sanitizer wipes by the checkout. I said, I've touched hundreds of items since I walked in here. I'm not so worried about my cart. I'm worried about right now after I've touched things that other people have touched. And they said, well, we can't really do that. We don't have enough money. And then somebody else said they were out of the Home Depot, said they were out of them when we walked in today to go shopping. So I think this is a problem. We need to start carrying these things around with us. Did you show them the little hand sanitizers that we carry around?
Yeah.
We have 2 ounce hand sanitizers everywhere in this house.
I could have done my own laundry with the amount of hand sanitizer.
But that's another thing. People don't think about every time you go shopping, and whether it's Home Depot or the grocery store, but I would have to say especially the grocery store.
You know, we're punishing people by having me
Why?
in the
No,
in
it's
front of the
fine.
camera. You should be in
I'll
front of the
smile
camera.
for 1 second.
But you ever seen somebody like try and like check out an apple to see if it's then they put it down, or they shake a watermelon to see if they can feel the seeds and they put it back
Right.
down. There's like the
Who
section
hasn't-
alone is ridiculous.
Who hasn't done that?
Yeah.
Who hasn't done it? Took a look at an apple and saw that it had a bruise or something, and put it back.
That's true.
We've also had a couple of questions in the chat about vitamin supplements. So vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc. Is there anything we should be kind of focusing on?
I have no hard evidence with regards to coronavirus, but there is evidence that vitamin C, if taken regularly, will decrease the length of time that you're down with the cold. And so that's one thing that I do believe in natural products that can help. I think antioxidants are very important, and you should include them in your diet: berries, fruits and vegetables,
Right,
things like that.
your
beta-carotene.
C's, your D's.
Right. So those are
lots of
important.
citrus and get out in the sun.
And right. Well, there you go. Getting out in the sun would be a good thing to do.
And
We've got another question here as well in regards to is temperature a factor in the lifespan of the coronavirus without a host?
Interestingly enough, the virus doesn't, and this was a surprise to me when I listened to a lecture by a virologist on the subject. He actually says the virus actually likes cold weather.
damn.
Oh, well.
So,
Doesn't help
I
us in
was
Canada.
surprised.
I did read the rationale.
I
though.
was surprised.
I read the rationale.
What was the rationale?
The rationale is it doesn't like heat and it doesn't like humidity. So when it's colder, it's drier, and so the virus can hang out in the air longer and get onto the next person.
Well, I guess that's why flu season happens in the winter, isn't it?
There you go.
And then another question: baby wipes, same effectiveness as the Sandy wipes? I'm going to guess the answer is no, but
Baby wipes the same as BZK, would you say?
It depends on if it has BZK in it. It depends on
on what.
there are natural baby wipes that are organic and full of essential oils and aloe and just really healthy for the baby, and not necessarily going to kill germs. So I would
not
not
necessarily antiseptic.
I would definitely not rely on baby wipes. You got to read the labels, but I, however, would rely on things that do say, kills viruses like this one. A label like
Benzoyl chloride.
a label like that,
Benzalconium chloride.
right?
they usually come in a little purple package in your first aid kits.
Yes. Yeah. Now, one thing that you need to know is that what happens when those things run out.
Exactly.
Okay. And when those things run out, you have to have some other way that you can do this. Now, bleach is useful for 6 months to a year before it loses its potency.
Pull shock.
Pool shock would be a granular. I don't know if you know anybody has a pool there, but there is something that is called pool shock. And pool shock is this granular substance that is calcium hypochlorite. Household bleach is sodium hypochlorite, but it's close enough. You can make a chloride solution out of it. Basically, you would take a pint and put it in 12 gallons of water, and that makes bleach. You're not putting that using that to disinfect your water, but that does make bleach. Then you take that, and if you need a 1 to 10 solution, you take 1 part of that and 9 parts of water, and then you can disinfect things with it. And so that's what you would.
That's what they actually used for the Ebola when they were doing the goggles.
Right.
And when they were dropping the boots into the orange buckets, that's what the solution was inside of those orange buckets was the 10% bleach.
Right.
Actually, Hughes actually has a really good video out on YouTube as well, doing the exact same thing with pool shock. So that's good.
Unlimited supply for $10. Yeah.
Yeah,
Last
there
time
you go.
supply beach for $10. Yeah.
You're a wise man.
Awesome. I think that's
All
all
right.
I have.
Yeah. We did just have one other question in regards to when you have all the equipment on, in regards to eating and drinking. That's obviously a no-go, right?
It's a no-go. In temperate climates, you can last a pretty good long time with all of your stuff on. Oh, what's going on? In temperate climates, you can last a pretty good long time with all of your equipment on. I felt so bad for these guys during the Ebola epidemic because they could last maybe about 40 minutes before they would get seriously overheated in West Africa. But in temperate, and that would be the same problem here. And here I probably wouldn't be able to last more than an hour, in the summer, if I had to be, dressed up in all this, all these items. But you guys, where you are, I think, are in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I don't know. I was in back in November. I was in it was an EPA level B suit, so that's a full SCBA and essentially your Tyvek suit that you were showing there. And we were doing some hazmat mitigation training, and within about half an hour, it was only 60 degrees or mid-teens in Canadian, but it was a reasonably temperate day, and by half an hour in, I was sweating pretty good. It doesn't allow for a lot of evaporation.
Right. What did they have you doing while you were?
Oh, that was we were in a few different drills. It was sweeping and absorbing liquid material with a granular absorbent, and then sweeping it into a bucket, and moving tools around and putting down absorbent socks. So it wasn't heavy duty work. We weren't lifting weights with it, but it was enough that we were generating heat and there was nowhere for the heat to go. And we were wearing 30-pound air bottles on the back. So
wow, that was a heck of a day, huh? Well, I want to say one thing that that I mention it once in a while, and I mentioned it before on the show, but everything that I write about assumes that there's some crazy thing that has occurred that's really taken modern medicine away from you or made it inaccessible or unwise to access. And in normal times, please seek modern and standard medical care whenever and wherever it is available. I mean, you do not have a respirator machine or ventilator in your home, most likely. And if you have a family member that needs to be on a ventilator, well, you're going to have to take them to the hospital. I would say that in times of trouble, it's probably unlikely that a lot of the people that need ventilators or to breathe for them are going to last very long. But, I just wanted to make sure that I say that. I don't want people to immediately decide that this doctor said nobody gets better in a hospital. I mean it in certain situations.
Yeah. So when times are good, seek out the appropriate medical care in your area.
There you go.
So does the panel have any other questions or anything else that we want to put forward?
No, I think I'm good.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you. I want to thank you guys so much for having me on and letting me talk to your audience.
Yeah, it's been our pleasure, Dr. Thank you very much for your information and sharing your knowledge with us. We certainly thank you for being able to come out and talk to us this evening. It's been great information.
Happy to do it. Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
And with that, maybe we will move into the podcast challenge.
All right. So for the challenge this week, we can take some basic precautions. You can buy or inventory your current supplies. Make sure you have enough bleach, gloves, coveralls, goggles, and masks on hand. Maybe consider your pandemic-specific DEFCON triggers. And hey, if you get the chance, get your hands on the Survival Medicine Handbook and read up on the quarantine and decontamination.
Right. And we'll move into some episode closing. So
go ahead, Eric.
We've got, so for some more information, you can visit Dr. Alton's YouTube. Check him out at DrBones and NurseAmy. We've got a link as well for the CDC, so some information there for you.
I also threw in at the bottom there, I threw in a real-time, basically for lack of a better term, a war room that's put together by Johns Hopkins University. It's basically an aggregator that comes up with all the caseload across the world, and it has neat little Dr. Evil style map on there that gives you current cases, deaths, everything else, recoveries. It's just nice to have up on your screensaver, for lack of a better thing.
All right, so we've got some upcoming events.
All right, so I got the Podcaster Charity Shoot coming up, hosted by Slamfire Radio on July 4th, 2020 in Balmoral, New Brunswick. That's the Restigouche Gun Club. We do have the charity now. It's this year's charity of choice is the Rod Harquail Memorial Fund. The fund is intended for the benefit of sick or injured children in our region. This includes expenses incurred by the families of sick or injured children for medical treatment, testing, equipment, or related travel expenses so they can receive the best treatment possible. So I threw the link up there as well for the Memorial Fund.
All right, so we've got the annual Preppers Meet coming up the second week of July in Desboro, Ontario. As always, it's going to be a good weekend with a lot of like-minded people, a lot of good instructors, a lot of good courses and seminars to take, and of course some good times around the campfire telling all kinds of stories. So it was a good weekend, and I believe tickets are going to be going on sale shortly. So we'll get that information out to you as soon as tickets are available. And Alan.
Oh, wait, that's me. Emergency Preparedness Week, which of course I was not prepared for. Coming up the week of May 3rd to 9th. Sorry, I got kind of distracted by that Johns Hopkins.
Pretty addictive, isn't it?
So Emergency Preparedness Week focuses on being able to be self-sufficient for 72 hours, having a plan to get out. There will be much more to come as we get closer to that, but that will be we'll be doing at least one episode about that.
And as well, we've got TACCOM Canada 2020 coming on September 11th to 13th. The Canadian Pro Gun Podcasters Network will be in attendance at TACCOM 2020, as well as their favorite podcasters will be on hand throughout the show. So make sure you drop by the booth to meet your favorite and pick up some swag. You can see the details in the show notes there.
We've also got a link on our website at prepperpodcast.ca. And if you follow that link through there, we get a little bit of some donation back, and I believe we're going to be donating that off to charity. So if you can follow that link, that'd be great. And if
you have an idea of the charity that we should be donating that to, please let us know, because we'd love to hear it. I have a shout out to Rogue Preparedness on Instagram. She puts out some great content about she's always got EDC gear going, spends a lot of time outdoors with her family. They're really well prepared. She also just started a podcast, which I've listened to a couple of episodes, well worth the listen. So yeah, go check them out. Rogue Preparedness on Instagram.
All right, just got a quick shout out to all the various Canadian prepper groups on Facebook and all the different chat platforms that I'm on. For the most part, everyone's been coming together and sharing all kinds of good advice on the coronavirus, and shutting down all those who are spreading fake alarmist and inaccurate information as well. So it's been really great to see the community kind of come together, share information, and not go down that alarmist path where everybody's freaking out, sharing all kinds of incorrect information. It's been shut down pretty quickly, and only the good, accurate stuff's been getting through. So it's been good to see.
That is nice.
All right, I've got one for Dr. Alton, of course. It's kind of like meeting one of your favorite rock stars. So it's been a pleasure having you on board. A lot of good information there for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
And as far as iTunes reviews go, we are at 44 5 stars. We're at 3 4 stars, 2 3 stars, and we've still got that one little guy at 1 star keeping us honest.
You'll get over it one day.
One day.
I don't think you will.
It's only been 53 episodes, right? So give some time. I'll get over it eventually. So with that, I'll bring episode number 53 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast to an end. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher now, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please help us out. Take a few minutes. You can submit a review. It helps other people find us.
We do record these shows live on Facebook and YouTube. If you want an early peek at the show, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Canadian Prepper Podcast, and click the notifications tab. That'll give you an alert when we're going live. We can also be found on our Facebook page, the Canadian Prepper Podcast. You can find me directly on Instagram at PPSWO, or as of earlier today by email, Alan at prepperpodcast.ca.
Hey, Dr. Alton, where can everybody find you?
Well, you can check out our website is doomandbloom.net. Our entire line of medical kits and supplies, including pandemic supplies, are at store.doomandbloom.net. Our YouTube channel is DrBones, NurseAmy YouTube channel. Our Facebook group, feel free to join our 6,000 strong survival medicine group. It's called Survival Medicine, DrBones, NurseAmy. We have... let me see what. Oh, and our podcast is called the Survival Medicine Podcast, and that is on Blog Talk Radio. Although you can find it on a lot of other platforms as well.
Yeah, it's available on iTunes for sure. As far as myself, you can reach Ian directly by emailing me now at ian@preparedness.ca or theislandretreat@gmail.com. You can also find me on Mondays on Canadian Patriot Podcast, also available on iTunes and YouTube. There you can find us discussing more government waste, squirreling off on the odd firearms-related banter, and exposing the daily loss of freedoms we're facing.
Every once in a while, I'd like you to be on an even firearms banter. It's always odd.
That's true. It's true.
And for myself, I can be reached now at hughes@prepperpodcast.ca. That's HUGUES, or hfxprepper@gmail.com. And I also have my own YouTube channel. Just search for HFX Prepper.
All right. For myself, please check out Rapid Survival at rapidsurvival.com. You can get me there on the live chat while you're buying some prepper gear. You can also email me at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca. Thanks for joining us. You can tune in for the next episode. We're going to be discussing hard alcohol production. So until next time, be prepared, stay safe,
and keep learning.